Sarah Martinez stood in front of the coffee shop counter, watching the small screen flash red again. The card reader made a loud beep sound that seemed to echo through the quiet morning air. Her face turned bright red as she realized everyone in the line behind her was staring. "I'm sorry, but your card has been declined again," the young barista said softly. His name tag read Jake, and he looked like he was barely 18 years old. He had kind eyes, but Sarah could see he felt uncomfortable with the situation. This was the third time her card had been rejected this morning. Sarah's hands started to shake as she dug through her old leather purse, looking for another card. The purse was worn and cracked, with loose threads hanging from the edges. She had bought it from a thrift store 6 months ago. Along with all the other clothes she now wore, behind her, she could hear people checking their phones and making small sighs of annoyance. A man in an expensive suit looked at his gold watch and shook his head. A woman in high heels tapped her foot on the floor, making clicking sounds that got faster and faster. "Maybe try this one?" Sarah whispered, pulling out a different credit card. Her voice was so quiet that Jake had to lean forward to hear her. The card looked just as worn as her purse, with scratches across the magnetic strip. Jake took the card and swiped it through the machine. They both watched the screen, hoping it would work this time. But after a few seconds, the same red light appeared, followed by the same loud beep. "I'm really sorry," Jake said again, handing the card back to her. "Sometimes the machine has problems, but I tried it twice and it's not working." What nobody in that coffee shop knew was that Sarah Martinez was not really poor. Hidden under her thrift store clothes and tired appearance was one of the most successful business owners in the entire country. At 32 years old, she had created a computer app that helped small businesses connect with local customers. Her company made millions of dollars every year, but for the past 6 months, Sarah had been living a completely different life. She had been sleeping in her old car, eating cheap food, and working simple jobs around the city. She only allowed herself to spend $20 each day. This was all part of a plan she had made after something terrible happened in her real life. The truth was that Sarah's success had come with a heavy price. 6 months ago, her best friend from college had died in a car accident. At the funeral, Sarah heard people talking about her friend in ways that shocked her. They said mean things about how her friend had asked them for help with money and how annoying it was. These were people who had plenty of money themselves, but they had no kindness for someone who was struggling. That day, Sarah realized she had become just like those people. When homeless people asked her for help on the street, she would walk past them quickly, avoiding eye contact. When friends from her past reached out because they needed jobs or money, she would make excuses not to help them. Success had made her heart cold, and she didn't like the person she had become. So Sarah decided to do something that nobody expected. She wanted to live like someone who really needed help, to understand what that felt like. She wanted to see how people would treat her when they thought she had nothing. She rented a cheap storage unit for her expensive clothes and furniture, bought old clothes from second-hand stores, and started this strange experiment. Now, standing in the coffee shop with everyone staring at her, Sarah felt the full weight of what it meant to be seen as poor. The embarrassment was real, even though she knew she could end this situation with one phone call to her bank. Her chest felt tight, and she could feel sweat on her forehead despite the cool morning air. Maybe I should just go," Sarah said, starting to put her cards back in her purse. She had been through this same situation many times over the past months, but it never got easier. Each time, it reminded her of how differently the world treated people based on how much money they appeared to have. Jake looked sad as he watched her struggle. "Are you sure? Maybe we could try calling the credit card company. Sometimes they put holds on cards for security reasons." Sarah shook her head. She knew the cards would work perfectly fine. She had set them up with very low limits on purpose, as part of her experiment. But she couldn't explain that to Jake without giving away her secret. The line behind her was getting longer, and people were starting to complain out loud. "Come on, some of us have to get to work," said the man in the expensive suit. A woman with a designer handbag rolled her eyes and said, Why don't people check their cards before they get in line? Sarah felt her face get even redder. In her real life, she had probably said similar things about people who held up lines. Now she understood how cruel those words felt when you were the person being talked about. She was about to give up and leave the coffee shop when something unexpected happened. A voice from behind her spoke up, gentle but clear. "I've got this," the voice said. Sarah turned around to see a man in his 40s stepping forward. He was wearing a simple blue button-down shirt and regular jeans. Nothing about his clothes looked expensive, but they were clean and neat. His hair was starting to turn gray at the edges, and he had smile lines around his eyes that made him look friendly. The man walked up to the counter and pulled out his wallet. "I'll pay for her coffee," he told Jake, handing over his credit card. He didn't look annoyed or frustrated like the other customers. Instead, he gave Sarah a warm smile that reached his eyes. "You don't have to do that," Sarah said quickly. "I can just leave, it's okay." "It's no problem at all," the man replied. "We've all had days when nothing goes right. Coffee is important, especially on Monday morning." Jake swiped the man's card, and this time the machine made a happy beep sound. The green light appeared on the screen, and Jake smiled with relief. "What would you like?" Jake asked Sarah, ready to make her order. Sarah was so surprised by the stranger's kindness that she almost forgot what she had wanted to order. "Just a small coffee, please. Black, no sugar." "Are you sure that's all?" the kind stranger asked. "The muffins here are really good. You should get one of those too." Before Sarah could protest, he told Jake, "Add a blueberry muffin to her order." As Jake prepared the coffee and wrapped up the muffin, Sarah studied the man who had helped her. There was something special about him, something she hadn't seen much during her months of living as a poor person. He wasn't helping her because he wanted to look good in front of other people. He wasn't doing it because he expected something back from her. He was just being kind because it was the right thing to do. "Thank you so much," Sarah said, meaning every word. "I really appreciate this." "Don't worry about it," the man said, waiting for his own order. "I'm David, by the way. David Chun." "I'm Sarah," she replied, careful not to give her last name. As they waited for David's coffee, Sarah noticed how the other customers in line seemed to relax. Some of them even smiled at what they had just seen. The angry energy from before had changed into something warmer and more human. The simple act of paying for a stranger's coffee was exactly what Sarah had been looking for during her 6 months of testing people's kindness. In all that time, very few people had shown her this kind of genuine care when they thought she was just another person struggling to get by. She didn't know it yet, but this moment would change everything. Sarah held her warm coffee cup with both hands, feeling the heat warm her fingers. She looked at David Chun, trying to understand why he had helped her. In all her months of pretending to be poor, very few people had shown her this kind of kindness without wanting something back. "Thank you again," Sarah said, her voice still quiet from embarrassment. "I really didn't expect anyone to help me like that." David smiled and waved his hand like it was no big deal. "Don't worry about it. I've been in tough spots before too. We all need help sometimes." He picked up his own coffee and pointed to a small table in the corner. "Want to sit down for a few minutes? I have some time before I need to get to work." Sarah nodded and followed him to the table. She was curious about this man who had helped her without asking any questions. During her experiment, most people either ignored her completely or asked too many personal questions that made her uncomfortable. As they sat down, Sarah noticed that David's clothes were simple but clean. His shoes were old but well taken care of. His watch looked like it came from a regular store, not an expensive jewelry shop. Everything about him seemed normal and honest. "So what do you do for work?" Sarah asked, taking a small sip of her coffee. "I'm a teacher," David said, and his face lit up when he talked about it. "I teach 7th grade at Roosevelt Middle School, about 10 minutes from here. Math and science mostly, but I also help coach the basketball team." Sarah was surprised. Teachers didn't make a lot of money, she knew that much. Yet here was a teacher who had just paid for a stranger's coffee without thinking twice about it. That Must be rewarding work, Sarah said. Do you like working with kids that age? David laughed. It's crazy most days. Seventh graders are wild. One minute they're acting like little kids, the next minute they think they're teenagers who know everything. But they're also amazing. When you help them understand something new, or when you see them being kind to each other, it makes all the hard days worth it. The way David talked about his students made Sarah think about her own work. She had built her company to help small businesses, but somewhere along the way, she had stopped thinking about the real people her app was supposed to help. She had gotten too busy counting money and making deals with big investors. How long have you been teaching? Sarah asked. 12 years now, David said. I started right after college. My parents thought I was crazy. They wanted me to get a job that paid more money, but I knew this was what I wanted to do. David told her about how he had grown up in a family that didn't have much money. His dad worked in a factory, and his mom cleaned office buildings at night. They had worked hard to send him to college, and they hoped he would get a job that would make him rich. But money isn't everything, David said, stirring sugar into his coffee. Don't get me wrong, I wish teachers got paid more. My wife Maria and I are saving up to buy our first house, and it's taking forever on our salaries. She's a nurse at the hospital downtown. We both work jobs that help people, but neither of us is going to get rich doing it. Sarah felt a strange feeling in her chest as she listened to David talk. Here was a man who had less money than she spent on a single business dinner, yet he was talking about his life with such happiness and satisfaction. He wasn't complaining or bitter about not having expensive things. We send money to my parents every month too, David continued. They're getting older and Dad's health isn't great. Social Security doesn't cover all their bills. But that's what family does, right? You help each other out. Sarah nodded, but inside she felt ashamed. She had more money than she could spend. In 10 lifetimes, but when was the last time she had really helped someone who needed it? When was the last time she had done something kind without expecting anything back? I come to this coffee shop every morning before school, David said, looking around the small restaurant. Mrs. Patterson, the owner, makes the best blueberry muffins in the city. She's been running this place for 20 years. Sarah looked toward the counter where an older woman with gray hair was working, Mrs. Patterson. Looked tired but smiled at every customer. She moved slowly but seemed to know exactly how each person liked their coffee. She's having a hard time lately, though, David said, lowering his voice. These big coffee chain stores keep opening up nearby. They can sell coffee cheaper because they buy everything in huge amounts. Small places like this one can't compete with that. David's face looked worried as he talked about Mrs. Patterson's problems. She's like a grandmother to everyone in this neighborhood. When kids from my school come in here after classes, she always gives them free cookies if they show her good grades on their tests. When Mr. Johnson from down the street lost his job last year, she let him drink coffee here for free every morning while he looked for work. Sarah listened carefully to every word. This was exactly the kind of small business her app was designed to help. Her technology could bring new customers to places like this coffee shop and help them compete with the big chains. But Mrs. Patterson probably didn't even know that apps like Sarah's existed. That's really sad, Sarah said. It sounds like this place means a lot to the community. It does, David said. I keep trying to think of ways to help her, but I don't have much extra money to spend. I already buy my coffee here every day, and I bring friends here when I can, but it might not be enough. Sarah wanted to tell David that she could solve Mrs. Patterson's problems easily. She could invest in the coffee shop, help them get more customers, even buy the whole building so Mrs. Patterson wouldn't have to worry about rent. But doing any of that would mean revealing who she really was. You're a really good person, Sarah said quietly. Not many people care about others the way you do. David looked surprised. I'm not special. I just think we should look out for each other, you know? Life is hard enough without making it harder for each other. He checked his watch and finished the last of his coffee. I should get going soon. The kids will be arriving at school in about 30 minutes, and I like to be there early to set up for the day. Thank you again for the coffee and muffin, Sarah said. You really saved my morning. It was nothing, David said, standing up and putting on his jacket. I hope your day gets better from here. As David walked toward the door, he turned back to Sarah. Hey, I don't want to be nosy, but if you're looking for work, the school district is always hiring substitute teachers. You don't need a teaching license to be a sub, just a college degree. The pay isn't great, but it's something. I could put in a good word for you if you're interested. Sarah felt her throat get tight with emotion. Even after helping her with coffee, David was still thinking of ways to help her more. That's very kind of you to offer, she managed to say. No problem. I come here every morning around this time if you want to talk about it more. Take care of yourself, Sarah. After David left, Sarah sat alone at the small table, staring at her coffee. She watched Mrs. Patterson working behind the counter, serving customers with a smile despite her financial troubles. She thought about David, driving to school to teach kids who probably had no idea how lucky they were to have a teacher who cared so much about them. For the first time in months, Sarah felt like she was beginning to understand what she had been looking for. Real kindness wasn't about giving money when you had plenty to spare. It was about sharing what little you had with someone who needed it more. It was about caring for your community, even when you had your own problems to worry about. She finished her coffee slowly, knowing that this morning had changed something important inside her. But she also knew her experiment was far from over. She needed to learn more about people like David, and she needed to figure out how to become more like them herself. The next morning, Sarah found herself walking back to Mrs. Patterson's coffee shop at exactly the same time as the day before. She told herself it was just because the coffee was good and the location was convenient. But deep down she knew she was hoping to see David again. She arrived just as David was ordering his usual coffee. When he saw her walk through the door, his face lit up with a genuine smile that made Sarah's heart feel warm. Sarah, good to see you again, David said, waving her over to the counter. How did yesterday go for you? Better, thank you, Sarah replied, getting in line behind him. I really appreciated your kindness yesterday. When it was Sarah's turn to order, she pulled out her card with nervous fingers. Just like the day before, the machine beeped and flashed red. Her card was declined again. Sarah felt her face turn red with embarrassment, but before she could say anything, David stepped forward. I've got it, he said simply, handing his card. To Jake the barista, same as yesterday, coffee and a muffin. You can't keep doing this, Sarah protested, but David just shook his head. It's fine, really. Everyone needs help sometimes. He paid for both their orders without making her feel bad about it. This became their routine over the next few weeks. Every morning, Sarah would arrive at the coffee shop around the same time as David. Sometimes her card would work, but often it wouldn't. David never made her feel embarrassed about it. He would just quietly pay for her coffee and act like it was the most normal thing in the world. During their morning conversations, Sarah learned more about David's life. He had been married to his wife, Maria, for 8 years. They had met when she was working as a nurse in the emergency room, and he came in with a student who had been hurt during a basketball game. Maria is the strongest person I know, David told Sarah one morning as they sat at their usual table. She works 12-hour shifts at the hospital, dealing with people who are sick and scared. Then she comes home and still has energy to help me grade papers or plan lessons. David's eyes always got soft when he talked about his wife. Sarah could tell he loved her very much. It made her think about her own life and how she had never found someone who cared about her the way David cared about Maria. Do you have any kids? Sarah asked one day. David's smile faded a little. We've been trying for a few years now, but it hasn't happened yet. The doctors say there's nothing wrong with either of us, that we just need to be patient. But it's hard sometimes, especially when you work with kids every day and love them so much. Sarah felt sorry for David and Maria. She could see how much David would love being a father. He talked about his students like they were his own children, worrying about the ones who came to school without breakfast and celebrating when the shy kids finally spoke up in class. As the weeks went by, Sarah noticed that David's kindness wasn't just for her. She watched him help Mrs. Patterson carry heavy boxes of supplies from her car. When an elderly man dropped his wallet in the parking lot, David ran after him to return it. When a young mother with 2 small children was struggling to manage her stroller and coffee at the same time, David held the door open and helped her get settled at a table. One rainy morning, Sarah arrived at the coffee shop to find David already there, but he looked different. His usual cheerful mood was gone, and his shoulders seemed heavy with worry. "Is everything okay?" Sarah asked as she sat down across from him. David sighed deeply. "It's my dad. He's been having chest pains, and the doctors want to run some expensive tests. My parents' insurance doesn't cover all of it, and they're too proud to ask for help. Maria and I are trying to figure out how to pay for it." Sarah's heart ached for David. She knew exactly how much those medical tests cost because she had paid for similar tests for her own employees. The amount that was causing David and Maria so much stress was less than Sarah spent on lunch most days in her real life. "I'm so sorry," Sarah said. "That must be really scary for your family." "It is," David admitted. "I keep thinking I should get a second job, maybe work evenings or weekends. But I already spend so much time at school with lesson planning and grading. I don't want Maria to feel like she's married to someone who's never home." David rubbed his forehead with his hands. "Sometimes I wonder if my parents were right. Maybe I should have chosen a career that paid more money. Then I could take better care of the people I love." "Money isn't everything," Sarah said, repeating the words David had said to her weeks earlier. "Look at all the good you do as a teacher. Look at how you help people every single day. That matters more than having a big bank account." David looked up at her with surprised eyes. "Thank you for saying that. Sometimes it's hard to remember." Sarah wanted desperately to help David with his father's medical bills. She could write a check right now that would solve all his problems. But she knew that would mean ending her experiment and revealing who she really was. She wasn't ready for that yet. Over the next few days, Sarah watched David carefully. Even though he was worried about his father and stressed about money, he continued to be kind to everyone around him. He still paid for Sarah's coffee when her card didn't work. He still helped Mrs. Patterson with heavy lifting. He still listened patiently when other customers wanted to talk about their problems. One morning, Sarah overheard David on the phone with his wife before she arrived at the coffee shop. He was telling Maria that he had found a weekend job cleaning offices, even though it meant he would have to work 7 days a week. "I know it's not ideal," David was saying into his phone, "but Dad needs those tests and we need to help them. We'll figure out how to make it work." When David hung up the phone, Sarah pretended she hadn't heard the conversation. But inside, she felt angry at herself. Here was a man who worked hard every day to help children learn and grow, and he was being forced to take a second job just to help his sick father. Meanwhile, Sarah had millions of dollars sitting in bank accounts that she barely thought about. That afternoon, Sarah sat in her car outside the coffee shop and stared at her phone. She could call her assistant right now and have David's father's medical bills paid within an hour. She could do it anonymously so David would never know it came from her. But something held her back. Sarah realized that part of her experiment wasn't just about seeing how people treated someone who appeared poor. It was also about learning to live with the limitations that most people faced every day. If she started using her money to solve problems, she would be cheating on her own test. But watching David struggle was becoming harder and harder to bear. He was such a good person, someone who deserved to have his problems solved and his kindness rewarded. Sarah began to wonder if her experiment was worth the pain it was causing her to see people she cared about suffer. As October turned into November, Sarah found herself looking forward to her morning coffee conversations with David more than anything else in her day. He had become her friend, maybe the first real friend she had made in years. The friendship was built on David's belief that she was just like him, someone working hard to get by in a world that didn't always make it easy. Sarah began to worry about what would happen when her experiment ended. Would David still want to be her friend when he learned the truth about who she really was? Would he feel like she had lied to him and used him? The thought of losing David's friendship scared her more than any business decision she had ever made. November brought cold mornings and shorter days, but Sarah still looked forward to her daily coffee meetings with David. Their friendship had become the brightest part of her experiment, even though it was also becoming the most difficult part to maintain. David had started his weekend cleaning job, and Sarah could see the tiredness in his eyes. He still smiled and asked about her day, but there were dark circles under his eyes and his shoulders sagged with exhaustion. "How's the new job going?" Sarah asked one Thursday morning as they sat with their coffee. David tried to smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "It's fine. Just cleaning office buildings on Saturday and Sunday nights. The pay is decent and it helps with Dad's medical bills." "That means you're working 7 days a week now," Sarah said with concern. "When do you rest?" "I'll rest after Dad gets better," David replied. But Sarah could hear how tired he was just from talking. The truth was that David's father's condition had gotten worse. The first round of tests had shown problems with his heart, and now he needed expensive surgery. Even with David's extra job and Maria picking up overtime shifts at the hospital, they were struggling to pay for everything. Sarah watched her friend getting thinner and more tired each day, and it broke her heart. She had nightmares about calling her bank and transferring money to help David's family. During the day, she would start to reach for her phone to make the call, then stop herself. She felt trapped between wanting to help her friend and staying true to her experiment. One cold Monday morning in early December, Sarah arrived at the coffee shop to find Mrs. Patterson looking very upset. The older woman was sitting at a table with papers spread out in front of her, and there were tears in her eyes. David was already there, sitting next to Mrs. Patterson and holding her hand while she cried. "What's wrong?" Sarah asked, hurrying over to their table. Mrs. Patterson looked up with red, puffy eyes. "I have to close the coffee shop," she said in a shaky voice. "My landlord is raising the rent by $400 a month starting in January. I can't afford that much." Sarah felt like someone had punched her in the stomach. This little coffee shop had become so important to her over the past few months. It was where she had met David, where she had learned what real kindness looked like. "There has to be something we can do," David said, his voice full of determination. "This place is too important to the neighborhood. You've been here for 20 years, Mrs. Patterson. You can't give up now." Mrs. Patterson shook her head sadly. "I've tried everything, David. I talked to the bank about a loan, but they said my business doesn't make enough money. I've cut costs everywhere I can. I even stopped paying myself last month just to keep the lights on." Sarah looked around the coffee shop that had become like a second home to her. She thought about all the regular customers who came here every day, the students from David's school who came for free cookies when they got good grades, the elderly people who met here to play cards and talk about their grandchildren. "The big coffee chain store down the street is probably celebrating," Mrs. Patterson continued. "They've been waiting for me to close so they can get more customers." David's face was red with anger, but Sarah could tell it wasn't anger at Mrs. Patterson. He was angry at a world where big companies could push out small businesses that meant so much to their communities. "How much do you need?" David asked. "Maybe we could start a fundraiser. Ask all your regular customers to help." Mrs. Patterson pulled out a calculator and showed them the numbers. Between the higher rent, needed repairs to the old coffee machines, and money she owed to suppliers, she needed $15,000 to keep the shop open. "That's a lot of money," David said quietly, but Sarah could see him thinking. She knew he was probably calculating how many extra jobs he would need to work to help save the coffee shop. Sarah's hands were shaking under the table. $15,000 was nothing to her. She spent more than that on a single business dinner when she was trying to close a big deal. She could write a check right now and save Mrs. Patterson's coffee shop without even feeling the financial impact. But she also knew that helping Mrs. Patterson would mean revealing who she really was. There was no way she could come up with $15,000 as the poor person she was pretending to be. "I have some money saved up," David said slowly. It's not much, but Maria and I have been putting aside money for a down payment on a house. We could use that to help. No, Mrs. Patterson said quickly. I won't let you give up your dream of buying a house just to save my coffee shop. You and Maria have worked too hard for that money. A house can wait, David said firmly. This place is more important. Sarah felt tears starting to form in her eyes. David was willing to give up his and Maria's dream of owning their own home to help save a coffee shop that meant something to his community. Even while he was working 7 days a week to pay for his father's medical bills, he was still thinking about how to help other people. I'll talk to some of the other regular customers, David continued. Maybe if we all chip in a little bit, we can raise enough money to help you stay open. Over the next few days, Sarah watched David work harder than ever to save Mrs. Patterson's coffee shop. He talked to everyone who came in, explaining the situation and asking for donations. He made flyers and put them up around the neighborhood. He even went to other small businesses nearby, asking them to help because they understood what it was like to compete with big chains. Sarah helped as much as she could without giving away her secret. She handed out flyers and talked to customers about donating. But inside, she felt like she was living a lie. By the end of the week, David had raised $3,000. It was an impressive amount for a small neighborhood, but it wasn't nearly enough to save the coffee shop. I don't know what else to do, David told Sarah on Friday morning. He looked defeated, like he was carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. Mrs. Patterson gave us until Christmas to come up with the money. After that, she has to sign the papers to close the shop. Sarah watched David stir his coffee with slow, tired movements. He had been working so hard to help everyone around him, his father, Mrs. Patterson, his students, even Sarah herself. But the problems were bigger than one person could solve. No matter how good their heart was, that night, Sarah sat in her car outside her storage unit, staring at the building where all her expensive clothes and furniture were locked away. Inside that small space was evidence of a life where $15,000 was pocket change, where she could solve David's problems and Mrs. Patterson's problems without even thinking about it. She thought about David's father, waiting for surgery that his family was struggling to afford. She thought about David and Maria working extra jobs and giving up their dream of buying a house. She thought about Mrs. Patterson facing the end of a business she had built over 20 years. All of these problems could be solved with money that Sarah had sitting in her bank accounts. Money that she wasn't even using. That was just numbers on a computer screen. For the first time in months, Sarah began to question whether her experiment was worth the pain it was causing. She had learned a lot about kindness and community and what really mattered in life. But was that knowledge worth watching good people suffer when she had the power to help them? Christmas was only 2 weeks away. Soon, Sarah would have to make a decision that would change everything. She could continue her experiment and watch Mrs. Patterson lose her coffee shop, or she could reveal the truth about who she was and save the place that had become so important to all of them. Either way, Sarah knew that her friendship with David would never be the same again. December 23rd arrived with snow falling softly outside the coffee shop windows. Sarah stood in the parking lot, watching the white flakes cover her old car, and made the hardest decision of her life. She couldn't watch Mrs. Patterson lose her business, and she couldn't watch David destroy his health trying to save everyone around him. Sarah walked into the coffee shop early that morning. Before any of the regular customers arrived, Mrs. Patterson was alone behind the counter, moving slowly as she cleaned the coffee machines. Her face looked older than it had just a few weeks ago, lined with worry and sadness. Mrs. Patterson, Sarah said quietly, could we talk privately for a few minutes? The older woman looked up with tired eyes. Of course, dear. Is everything okay? Sarah's hands were shaking as she reached into her purse and pulled out her real wallet, not the worn, empty one she had been carrying for months. From inside, she took out her driver's license and several business cards. Mrs. Patterson, I need to tell you something important. My name really is Sarah, but my last name isn't what I told you. I'm Sarah Martinez, and I own a technology company. Mrs. Patterson stared at the business cards with confusion. I don't understand, dear. Sarah took a deep breath. For the past 8 months, I've been pretending to be poor. I've been living like someone who has no money, sleeping in my car, wearing old clothes, working simple jobs. It was an experiment, to see how people treat someone they think is struggling. But why would you do such a thing? Mrs. Patterson asked, sitting down heavily in a chair. Because I had forgotten what it meant to be human, Sarah said, her voice breaking slightly. I became so successful and so rich that I stopped caring about other people. I stopped seeing people who needed help. I walked past homeless people. On the street, I ignored friends who asked for help. I became the kind of person I used to hate. Mrs. Patterson listened with wide eyes as Sarah explained about her friend's funeral, about hearing people say cruel things about someone who had needed help, about realizing she had become just like those people. I wanted to understand what it felt like to need help, Sarah continued. I wanted to see if there were still good people in the world, people who would help a stranger without expecting anything back. And you found David, Mrs. Patterson said softly. Yes, Sarah said, wiping tears from her eyes. David showed me what real kindness looks like. Every day he helped me and treated me with respect, even when he thought I had nothing to offer him. He restored my faith in humanity. Sarah pulled out her phone and showed Mrs. Patterson her real bank account balances. The numbers on the screen made Mrs. Patterson gasp. I want to help save your coffee shop, Sarah said. Not just with money, but with my business too. My company builds apps that help small businesses connect with local customers. I can create a special program just for you that will bring new people to your shop while keeping the neighborhood feeling you've worked so hard to build. Mrs. Patterson stared at the phone screen, then at Sarah, then back at the screen. I can't believe this is real, she whispered. It's real, Sarah said. I can have lawyers bring the papers this afternoon. We can pay off your debt, cover the rent increase, buy new equipment, whatever you need. But Mrs. Patterson, I need you to understand something important. The older woman leaned forward, listening carefully. Everything I felt during these months was real, Sarah said. My gratitude for David's kindness was real. My friendship with him was real. My care for you in this coffee shop was real. The only thing that wasn't real was my financial situation. Mrs. Patterson reached across the table and took Sarah's hands in her wrinkled ones. You're a good person, Sarah. I could see that from the beginning. Money doesn't change that. Just then, the bell above the door rang and David walked in. He looked exhausted, like he hadn't slept well, but he still managed to smile when he saw Sarah and Mrs. Patterson sitting together. Good morning, ladies, David said, walking over to their table. You two are here early today. Sarah felt her heart pounding as she looked up at David. This was the moment she had been dreading for weeks. She was about to find out if their friendship could survive the truth. David, please sit down, Sarah said. There's something I need to tell you. David's smile faded as he noticed the serious expressions on both women's faces. He sat down slowly, looking worried. Is everything okay? Did something happen? David asked. Sarah took a deep breath and began to explain everything she had just told. Mrs. Patterson. She watched David's face change as she talked, first confusion, then surprise, then something that looked like hurt when she finished talking. David sat in silence for a long time. Sarah could hear her own heartbeat in her ears as she waited for him to respond. So you've been lying to me this whole time, David finally said, his voice quiet and flat. Not lying about everything, Sarah said quickly. Not about being grateful for your kindness. Not about caring about this coffee shop or about your family. Those feelings were completely real. But you let me pay for your coffee every day when you had millions of dollars in the bank, David said. You let me worry about you, try to help you find jobs, give you free food. You watched me work 7 days a week and never said anything. Sarah felt tears starting to fall down her cheeks. I know how it looks, David. I know it seems cruel. But I was trying to learn something important about humanity, and you taught me more than I ever expected to learn. What did you learn? David asked, and Sarah could hear anger creeping into his voice. I learned that there are still genuinely good people in the world, Sarah said. I learned that real kindness has nothing to do with how much money you have. I learned that the things that matter most, friendship, community, caring for each other, can't be bought. Sarah reached across the table toward David, but he pulled his hands away. I learned that someone like you, who has so little compared to what I have, can still be more generous than people who have everything, Sarah continued. You were willing to give up your house savings to help Mrs. Patterson. You work extra jobs to help your father. You help me every day without expecting anything back. You're a better person than I ever was, even with all my money. David shook his head. You don't understand. It's not about the money, Sarah. It's about trust. I thought we were friends, real friends? But you were just studying me like I was some kind of experiment. That's not true, Sarah said desperately. It started as an experiment, but it became real friendship. You became important to me, David, more important than you know. How can I believe anything you say now? David asked. How do I know what was real and what was just part of your experiment? Sarah felt like her heart was breaking. She had known this moment would be painful, but she hadn't expected it to hurt this much. I understand why you're angry, Sarah said. I understand why you feel betrayed. But please believe me when I say that my friendship with you changed my life. You reminded me why I started my business in the first place, to help people, not just to make money. David stood up from the table. I need time to think about this, he said. I need to process what you've told me. Of course, Sarah said. Take all the time you need. David walked toward the door, then stopped and turned back. Are you really going to help Mrs. Patterson save the coffee shop? Yes, Sarah said immediately. The lawyers are coming this afternoon with the papers. David nodded once, then left without saying goodbye. Sarah sat with Mrs. Patterson in the empty coffee shop, both of them quiet as they watched the snow fall outside. Sarah had gotten what she wanted. She was going to save the coffee shop and help the community she had grown to love. But she might have lost the most important friendship she had ever had. 3 days passed without David coming to the coffee shop. Sarah arrived every morning at their usual time, hoping to see him walk through the door, but he never came. Mrs. Patterson tried to comfort her, but Sarah could see the older woman was worried too. He's a good man, Mrs. Patterson said on Christmas Eve morning. He just needs time to understand why you did what you did. Sarah nodded, but inside she felt empty. The coffee shop was bustling with activity as lawyers and contractors worked to implement all the changes Sarah had promised. New equipment was being installed, the walls were being painted, and Mrs. Patterson had hired 2 new employees to help with the expected increase in customers. This is all wonderful, Mrs. Patterson said, watching a worker install a new espresso machine. But it won't feel right if David isn't here to see it. That afternoon, Sarah made a decision that scared her. She looked up David's address and drove to his house. It was a small, neat home with a tiny front yard decorated with Christmas lights. Through the window, she could see David and a woman she assumed was his wife, Maria, sitting on their couch talking. Sarah sat in her car for 20 minutes, trying to find the courage to knock on their door. Finally, she walked up to the front steps and rang the doorbell. David answered the door, and his face showed surprise when he saw her. Sarah, I wasn't expecting you. I know, Sarah said. I'm sorry to bother you at home, but I need to talk to you, and I need you to understand something important. David hesitated, then stepped aside to let her in. Maria, this is Sarah, the woman I told you about. Maria was a pretty woman with kind eyes and dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. She was wearing scrubs, probably just home from a shift at the hospital. When she looked at Sarah, her expression was guarded but not unfriendly. Nice to meet you, Maria said politely. I know David told you about what I did, Sarah said. I know you probably think I'm a terrible person for deceiving him. Maria glanced at her husband, then back at Sarah. I think what you did was complicated, she said carefully. I'm not sure I understand why it was necessary. Sarah sat down on the edge of their couch and took a deep breath. Can I tell you a story about why I started this experiment? For the next hour, Sarah told David and Maria about her friend's death. about the cruel things people had said at the funeral, about realizing she had become someone she didn't like. She told them about her months of living in her car, about learning what it felt like to be treated badly because people thought she was poor. "I wasn't trying to hurt anyone," Sarah said. "I was trying to save myself from becoming a person who only cared about money." David listened quietly, his arms crossed, but Sarah could see his expression softening as she talked. "The day you paid for my coffee was the first time in months that someone had shown me genuine kindness," Sarah continued. "Not because they wanted something from me, not because they knew I was rich, but just because you saw another human being who needed help." "But you could have told me the truth," David said. "You could have trusted me with your secret." "You're right," Sarah admitted. "I was scared that if you knew who I really was, you would treat me differently. I was scared you would want things from me or that you would only be nice to me because of my money." Maria leaned forward, but David isn't like that. Anyone who knows him would know he's not like that. "I know that now," Sarah said. "But at the time, I had been hurt by so many people who pretended to care about me but really only cared about my money. I had lost the ability to trust anyone." David was quiet for a moment. "So what happens now?" he asked. Sarah reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. "This is a check for your father's medical bills," she said. Holding it out to David, David stared at the envelope but didn't take it. "I can't accept that." "Why not?" Sarah asked. "Because it feels like you're trying to buy my friendship back," David said. Sarah put the envelope on the coffee table between them. "I'm not trying to buy anything. I'm trying to help someone I care about. Your father needs surgery and you're killing yourself working 2 jobs to pay for it. Let me help." "It's too much," David said, shaking his head. "It's not too much for me," Sarah said gently. "David, the amount of money you've been struggling to save is less than I spend on coffee in a month. Let me use my resources to help people I care about." Maria looked at her husband with tears in her eyes. "David, your father has been waiting for that surgery for 2 months? The doctors say it can't wait much longer." David ran his hands through his hair, clearly struggling with the decision. "It doesn't feel right. Taking money from someone who lied to me? I didn't lie about caring about your family," Sarah said. "I didn't lie about wanting your father to get better. Those feelings are completely real." Sarah stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the Christmas lights in the neighborhood. "David, you taught me something important these past few months. You taught me that the best people are the ones who help others even when they don't have much to give themselves." She turned back to face him. "You have been working 7 days a week, giving up sleep, giving up time with your wife, all to help your father? That's the kind of person I want to be. Someone who uses what? They have to help the people they love." "But I work hard for my money," David said. "It means something because I earned it." "And I worked hard for my money too," Sarah replied. "I built my company from nothing. I worked 18-hour days for years to make it successful. The difference is that I was lucky enough to build something that made a lot of money. That luck comes with responsibility." Maria reached over and took her husband's hand. "Maybe Sarah is right. Maybe this is her way of doing what you do every day, helping people who need it." David looked at his wife, then at Sarah, then at the envelope on the table. After a long moment, he picked it up with shaking hands. "Thank you," he said quietly. "This means more to my family than you know." "There's something else," Sarah said. She pulled out her phone and showed them pictures of the coffee shop renovations. "Mrs. Patterson's place is going to be bigger and better than ever. But it won't be the same without her favorite customer." David smiled for the first time since Sarah had arrived. "You really saved her coffee shop?" "We saved it," Sarah corrected. "You're the one who organized the fundraiser, who got the community involved. I just provided the money. The heart of what saved that place came from you." David stood up and walked over to Sarah. For a moment, she thought he was going to ask her to leave. Instead, he held out his hand. "Friends?" he asked. Sarah felt tears of relief fill her eyes as she shook his hand. "Friends," she agreed. "But no more lies," David said firmly. "If we're going to be friends, it has to be honest friendship." No. More lies, Sarah promised. Maria smiled and stood up too. Well, if you're going to be David's friend, you might as well stay for dinner. I made enough food for an army, and it's Christmas Eve. As Sarah sat around the dinner table with David and Maria, eating homemade tamales and listening to stories about David's students, she realized something important. Her experiment was over, but what she had gained from it was just beginning. She had learned that real friendship wasn't about money or status. It was about caring for each other, being honest with each other, and helping each other through difficult times. She had also learned that she could use her wealth as a tool for good, not just for making more money. Most importantly, she had learned that there were still good people in the world like David and Maria, people who would help a stranger buy coffee and mean it from their hearts. The next morning, Sarah arrived at Mrs. Patterson's coffee shop to find David already there, sitting at their usual table with 2 cups of coffee waiting. "Merry Christmas, Sarah," he said with a genuine smile. "Merry Christmas, David," she replied, sitting down across from her friend. Outside, snow was falling again, but inside the warm coffee shop, surrounded by friends who cared about each other, Sarah finally felt like she had found her way home.